Sean, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. To start us off, could you introduce yourself and briefly share your background working with nonprofit organizations?
Sure. Thank you so much, Jane, for inviting me here today. So I have been in the nonprofit sector technically since I was a kid. When I was 8 years old, my mom went back to work at a nonprofit as the executive director, and she was there for 30 years. And so my very first job ever as a teen was doing custodial work at that nonprofit. And then as an adult, I've been in the sector since 1999. I've gotten to work at a variety of different organizations and wear all the hats. And I learned over time that the way that I can really add the most value, have the biggest impact, is in the kind of finance, administrative, accounting type roles. And it's a lot of fun. It lets me hang out with nice people, which is lovely.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you. So your Beyond Belt Tightening blog that you kindly wrote for our website, JBL Strategies website, it breaks down 3 practical habits nonprofits can use to navigate financial challenges during times of crisis. In a nutshell, what are those 3 habits that you believe are important for nonprofits to adopt?
Yeah, so the first of those is getting a fresh perspective. It can be very difficult for anybody, whether it's your personal life or professional life, to see things with fresh eyes after you have been in a situation for months or years. And so when you can get that fresh perspective by having somebody from outside come in, that can bring to light all sorts of things that maybe have been right under your nose. I remember sitting down and having coffee with a colleague who told me the story of his first couple of weeks on the job as the executive director at a nonprofit. And he said, "Hey, Sean, like one of the things that I did was I just started asking questions. And one of the questions I asked staff was like, tell me about this rusty old van in the parking lot. It looks like it hasn't moved for a while." And they said, "Oh yeah, that's our van. It hasn't worked for a couple of years." And so like, why is it still here? And dig a little further, and why are we still paying insurance on a vehicle that hasn't moved for years? And so that very quickly, like that, the organization was spending all kinds of money for this vehicle that they weren't using. So stop the insurance payments and sell it at least for a scrap or something, right? Get a little bit of information and free up a parking space in the organization. So that fresh perspective, it can be valuable to in all kinds of circumstances. Then we also have filtering decisions through the organization's mission and values. And this is another thing that we forget very often. And so certainly a tool that I like to use for making difficult decisions is the matrix map. And you can find this on my blog. You can just Google it on the internet, Matrix Map Nonprofit. There's some great articles and there's even a book about it. But the basic idea is that you do this exercise where you look at every major activity that the organization has. And you look at it from a mission alignment perspective, right? How much does this activity contribute to our mission or not? And then also from a profitability perspective. Are we losing money on this activity or are we getting money? And just because an activity might be losing money doesn't mean you necessarily stop it. It can be the most important piece of your mission. It can be the most important thing you do, but you need to understand that it's losing money. You need to understand how much it's losing so that you can, especially if you're in difficult financial times, manage those losses and figure out how you're going to offset those. And then the mission alignment also is there to help you figure out really where do we put our energy. And if it's a difficult budget year, even if it's a good budget year, if an activity, if you're losing money on it and it doesn't have strong mission alignment, maybe you need to stop it. And then the third item is investing strategically in the right tools. And this can be all sorts of things, but especially, the place where I see it most often is technology. And very often in the nonprofit sector, we believe in squeezing every penny, and we definitely want to be careful with the money that's been trusted to us. At the same time, sometimes we can get carried away. And when that happens, we do not get the right tools to do the work. And so we end up spending a lot of time on that. There was a great organization I got to work with once, Blue Ribbon Board, really smart staff, very capable leadership, a lot of community respect. And I'm looking around and I see, oh my gosh, there are a lot of old computers here, a lot of old laptops that were kind of broken down, not doing very well. I asked about it and come to find out those laptops had been a gift from a funder because the funder had said, "Oh, you know what? These laptop computers are 2 years old. our staff here at the grant making institution, they need good new tools. And so they call the nonprofit, say, hey, would you like some free laptops? And the nonprofit people say, oh yes, please, 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 please. And that had happened, I want to say 3, 4, 5 years before I got to see what was going on. So of course these laptops were barely holding it together. So I go to the executive director, very capable leader, I say, hey dude, this is obviously like no good. And he goes, I don't know what you mean. Like, we saved all kinds of money. It was a gift. Hooray us. And so, all right. So my message didn't get through. Think it over. I do a little bit of back of the envelope scribbles. Go back to him and say, hey, you know what? With conservative estimates, the organization is losing at minimum $1,500 per employee per year in lost productivity, where you're paying somebody $1,500 a year to twiddle their thumbs while they're waiting for that computer to reboot, or because it's moving slowly. And this, that, and the other. And he's like, oh my gosh, you're saying that new computers would pay for themselves in 6 months? We need to get new computers for everybody right now. And so we did, and we even got backup computers for folks. So there were a couple of brand new computers just sitting in the closet, waiting for the staff person that might need them, because we did not want, once everybody understood that staff time was valuable, we stopped wasting it.
That's a very good segue to my next question. You speak about these habits not being crisis management tactics, but rather standard practice for organizations. What are some of the barriers that keep organizations from having those 3 habits in the first place, and how should leaders navigate that?
One of the biggest barriers that I see, and this is really endemic in the sector, is the overhead myth. And this is a fun little thing you can Google, and don't just Google overhead myth. There's I think it's the #1 TED Talk for nonprofits by Dan Pallotta on the overhead myth. And it's this crazy idea that the organizations that have the biggest impact, you can see which ones they are because they're the ones that spend the least amount on administration. And if you think about it very much, it starts to seem kind of silly, and it is, that the organizations really, if you want to find the organizations that have the biggest impact, you find the ones that have the biggest impact. And if you're worried about the financial cost, then you figure out, well, per dollar spent, who's doing the most in whatever issue area I care about. How much they're spending on administration is just a sideshow. Because really, from a donor perspective, if you're worried about impact and your dollar having the most impact, then look at that, not the administrative side. But because the sector has been bought into this for so long, we've already been working for more than a decade to get rid of it. We have to really change a lot of habits, because we think it's normal, like brushing our teeth, and it's not. Brushing our teeth is normal. It is a good behavior. Bending yourself backwards because of the overhead myth is an unnatural behavior, and it holds back our mission impact.
Absolutely. So what are some of the financial challenges you've seen where these 3 habits can be used to address them?
Well, certainly things like that computer example is a good one, right? Where we can very quickly get to saving money for the organization. And similarly, there are just other tools that we see nonprofits not investing in, or even one where it's not exactly a tool, I don't want to call it a tool, but it's investing appropriately in staff. There's an invisible thing that happens in organizations, and that's turnover. And it does not appear on your standard financial reports. And so it's very easy to forget about. But turnover is actually one of the most expensive things that you can have happen in an organization. Turnover can cost you anywhere from 50% of annual compensation to well over 100% of annual compensation once you take into account all the time and the pain that goes into turnover. And gosh, because of the overhead myth, we're not necessarily paying our staff well to be able to retain them. We're not paying well enough to attract top talent to get in the door in the first place. We're not necessarily providing the sorts of benefits that are attractive to them. And so that's another area where I see the overhead myth really driving otherwise really good and capable leaders to make choices that are penny wise and pound foolish.
That's really good. You mentioned the idea of filtering decisions through the mission and values, and that the mission and values must be strong enough to lean on. What can leaders do to pressure test their mission and values to make sure they're strong enough to lean on?
Well, I have an unorthodox idea for you, and we'll see how this sits with you. But for me, you should be able to say the mission in one breath. Anybody should be able to, in one short breath, not like a. That's one way of knowing whether or not you have a living mission. And then another test would be like, do your staff and do your board, do they know it? Can they get in an elevator with somebody and rattle it off? And similarly with the values. If people don't know what these are, it's not a living mission, and people aren't going to be bringing it into the room, even if you've printed it on the wall. If people can't remember it because you've made one of these kitchen sink mission statements that takes 5 or 10 breaths or whatever to get it all out, what's guiding you?
Mm-hmm. So how do you advise from a financial perspective the importance of leaning in on that clear mission and value?
Absolutely, you should bring the mission into all of your major decisions. Before an organization takes the very weighty and very important decision of whether or not to add a new activity, a new program, you should look really carefully at the mission alignment of that, because very often that is going to tell you the story. And just because we're good at something, or just because it's adjacent to what we're doing, doesn't mean we should necessarily do it, because the organizational burden of adding a new program, I think we underestimate that.
And the cost too.
The cost, and just how much it can distract us. And so instead of us being really good at one thing, we're kind of sort of good at 3 or 4 things, or we do a mediocre job at 10. And the analogy I like to use, like when you go to a restaurant like Five Guys, you know you're going to get a burger and fries, because that's literally the only thing they will serve you besides a shake or a soda. And you can hold them to a really high standard because they only do one thing.
Right.
But you go to a place that does burgers and Mexican and Italian and seafood and Indian food and this, that, and the other, it's not going to be very good. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a crummy meal at best. Hopefully you don't get food poisoning.
So what are the warning flags, signals that organization leaders should look out for when it comes to finances, so that they can be proactive rather than reactive and not create greater cost?
Well, certainly it's good to have your eyes on the horizon, or even going over the horizon. And the tricky thing about the standard financial reports, and this is true of QuickBooks, it's true of other accounting software, is that the standard software, it's really backwards looking, because that's technically the difference between accounting and finance. Accounting is going to be backwards looking. Finance is going to be forward looking. And if we're going to see troubles coming for our organization, we have to be looking forward, which means we're taking what comes out of our accounting system and we're doing some analysis. And certainly a cash flow projection, every organization, unless they have $1 bazillion in the bank, which great if you do, but if you're not one of those special organizations with a bunch of money in the bank, you should be doing a cash flow projection and updating it monthly, so that you're not surprised. And even if you have a budget that you feel confident about and that is going to end the year either net zero or positive, that doesn't mean you don't have necessarily a dip in the middle of the year, where maybe you're having a lot of expenses come due at the same time that it's summer and donations are drying up, and maybe all your big grants land in the fall or whatever. So you can have a really healthy annual budget and still have these blind spots that if you're not plotting things out month by month and looking at cash, all of a sudden you can find yourself in the unenviable position that too many executive directors find themselves in, of coming in one day and saying, oh my gosh, we don't have enough money in the bank to run payroll, and calling up all the board members like, oh gosh, I kind of messed this one up. Do you think you can lend us $20,000?
So that's cash projections?
Well, a cash projection, yeah.
Okay, and what about forecasting, budget forecasting? Like 2 to 3 years?
Yeah. So that would be another tool for me. That can be a good one, especially if you're talking about the strategic plan kind of thing, and making sure, is this strategic plan feasible, and can we, are we actually thinking about, is this strategic plan feasible, and are we clear about how much money we need to raise in year 2, 3, 4, and 5? But for organizations that haven't done either of those, I would start simple, which might be the kind of, let's get the next 6 to 12 months figured out. And then by all means, and it can be a lighter lift to do multi-year things, because then you're not getting so granular as you would in a full budget.
AI is a trending topic of conversation at the moment and has been seen as a potential tool to support nonprofits. Do you think it can be used to address financial challenges? And if so, what are some of the best resources and practices?
You know, the best practice I would have for every organization, unless you have a bunch of people who love fax machines and ride a horse to work, chances are there are one or more people in your organization already using AI. And that should worry you a little bit because they might be using it in ways that you wouldn't want them to. And so at minimum, go ahead and figure out what is our default AI tool and what kind of information are we not putting in there. And this is something you don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. This can be a very simple policy that you put in place in 15 minutes, so at least you have something. And then go back and over the coming months, by all means, flesh it out, make it stronger. But otherwise, you may have people not just doing innocuous things like, can you help me take this good letter I'm writing and make it even better, right? You could have people putting sensitive information into the AI that you really wouldn't want to have out there or wouldn't want to have the board or donors know is getting dropped into AI, even if no other mischief happened with it. And so by having that policy in place, then you can, train your staff, set expectations, and follow up as appropriate. So that I see as being a risk area for most organizations, is they don't have the basics in place yet.
So they need the basics in place, and then they can start perhaps using them as a financial forecasting resource, or what?
Yeah, I haven't played around. I've used AI a lot, but not in that context. I think we're on the cusp of it being very powerful in that way. And so, for example, our friend Neil Shaw is doing some exciting things in that area. And so for people who do dabble in the finances, I would say, play with the tools, strip out anything that could remotely be personally identifying to the organization, perhaps, if you want to be on the safe side, and then see what you can do with it. But then always, I would treat AI like a really smart intern, that they can, really eager and smart intern, because they can do great things, but it's going to make mistakes. And so you still need to have somebody there to double check it. And with the right tool and the right person double checking it, it's going to save lots of time, but it's not one of those things where you just dump all the data in and walk away. Just like you don't just throw something in the oven and walk away.
Okay. Yeah. So bringing it back around to your Beyond Belt Tightening blog, which people can see on our website, in conclusion, what would you want us to take away from this conversation?
Sometimes these conversations especially around money, can feel overwhelming for nonprofit leaders. And I don't want to leave anybody with that feeling, because you might have been sitting here and going, oh my gosh, I need this and this and this and this and this and this and this. Rome wasn't built in a day, and that's okay. Have your list, but just address this the same way you would, like in the old joke about eating an elephant, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so similarly, take this one bite at a time. If you've made a list of a few things that you might want to follow up on, great. Can you just plot that out, one per month? That you're gonna at least figure out, where are we on this? Because you might not even know, are we doing this or not? Figure out where you are, and then figure out who it's appropriate to maybe have them run with this thing and take it from there, so that over the course of maybe 6 to 12 months, you're able to check off the boxes. And if there were anything we're going to add on top of that, or to emphasize, I suppose, would be the peer perspective is really, really important for nonprofit leaders. It's very easy for us to get so busy, especially if our kind of work expectations are 50 plus hours a week. It can be very hard to just get locked into our desk and locked into the computer. And so having that peer network, I found, is really important. And so for the financial professionals out there, find a network of nonprofit financial professionals, or if there really isn't one where you are, there are some remote ones. Our friend Neil Shaw happens to have one, or start one where you just reach out to a few other nonprofit professionals in your town and like get together for coffee every couple of months and put it on everybody's calendar, because that kind of thing can do wonders for getting perspective. When you can have a good trusted group of peers who've walked in the same shoes that you have. You can toss a situation out to them, and they can really quickly give you a sense of, should I be worried? Should I not be worried? How might I react to this thing? How might I learn from other people's experience? Because chances are one of your peers has been through the same thing, and even if they made a royal mess of it, you can learn from the mess that they made of it if they're willing to share that with you. And that's golden. At least you can not repeat their mistakes.
Yeah, excellent. One last question, which is a curveball. So, financial reporting to the board is always a huge discussion, because for the most part, most nonprofits that we've come across present the financial P&L, the whole thing, boring, and most board members glaze over and pass out if they, unless they're interested in numbers. How do you, give me one thing that executive directors and treasurers can do to present the numbers in a way that they are of interest, they are relevant, and they can be executed, implemented?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. This is another one of these silly things that happen in nonprofits, but also outside of nonprofits, I believe, where, well, this is the report that comes out of QuickBooks, and so I'll print it out and I'll give it to everybody and the magic happens. But we see their faces and we know, oh, the magic isn't happening. They hate this. What do? We want our board to be making good decisions. We want our board to be informed. We want them to be engaged with the finances. If they're not engaged with the finances, they don't feel ownership for the organization. They're not going to step up the way that they could if they felt that engagement and that ownership. And so they need to actually feel like they understand the organization's financial health. And there's no amount of trying to turn them into a CPA that is going to turn them into a CPA if they're not one already. We need to go to them. And the way that we do that is by taking the key measures of the organization's financial health. And that is going to be things like days of cash on hand and a cash flow projection, the profitability of each major activity, and each organization is going to have a few more, but we're going to take 5 to 10 key measures of the organization's financial health. We're going to turn those into graphics that are easy on the eye, that are easy for people who are never going to be CPAs, maybe don't even like balancing their checkbooks. But they can look at that and they can see, well, gosh, cash just keeps on going down. I need to know more about that. I need to ask some questions. Or money that's owed to us, accounts receivable, that keeps on going up. Is there a problem here? I want to know, right? Because I'm worried about the organization's financial health. And just having that engagement, having that there, it's not just going to be good for getting the board engaged, which we want, right? We want them to feel that ownership, but they're also going to bring perspectives and questions that maybe nobody on staff is going to have. And where our default setting is with it's the finance director and it's the treasurer who are the only ones who know how to read the magical tea leaves, you're getting really limited perspective on a key measure of the organization's health. We need all these different perspectives because sometimes that person who's organizing the gala is going to look at the whole thing and have an insight that nobody else is going to have.
So can people find a template for an ideal financial report? Or
they can. There's one on my website.
Thank you. that is good. We will refer them to you. And
Yeah.
Sean, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. And if they want to know more, they can go to your Beyond Belt Tightening blog